Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast for the 16th of March 2023. My name is Mark Hillary and I'm in sunny Sao Paulo.
And I'm Peter Ryan in gray and dreary Montreal. It's a typical Canadian spring that we're going through, at least here on the eastern part of central Canada. But Mark, it's great to be with you. And all I can say is no matter how dreary and gray it is here in Montreal today, it was significantly more dreary, rainy, and cold in London last week.
Well, sometimes you get that in London, but I guess at least it wasn't Manchester, because that would definitely be worse.
Well, I heard about the air stop in Manchester. I heard about the snow that was happening. Just for full disclosure, a few days before I was in London, I spent a number of days in Glasgow with my CX Outsourcers contemporaries, Leanne Rowlands, Tracy Freeman, and Steve Weston, planning the event. And I can tell you, we avoided snow up there, but it certainly was on the nippy side.
Well, and my flights are booked. I'm looking forward to the event in May. Hopefully anyone listening to this who's available to be up there in Glasgow is going to check out the show notes and look for cxoutsourcers.com, isn't there?
cxoutsourcers.com indeed. And what I would say, Mark, is that if anybody from the BPO side, any BPO executive wants to register, we encourage them to do so. It's May 30-31 in Glasgow. We can provide more information, but the tickets are going fast. In fact, we're at this point roughly 2/3 sold out of tickets. So really hope that anybody who's interested in wanting to come and take part in the premier outsourced CX Mindshare event that happens annually, now is the time to get signed up and to make sure that your place is secure.
Okay, cool. So why don't we just talk a little bit about this week's interview, because we've got an old friend for a long time, Matt Sims, who's now the president EMEA of Alorica. We did an interview, I think it was 2018, and for a long time that was the favorite episode. I think for more than a year it was the most downloaded episode. So eventually somebody knocked Matt off his perch as number one, but we'll see how he does this time. Now he's with Alorica. Alorica is really beefing up their presence in the EMEA region. They've been opening up some delivery centers across Europe and in Egypt. And I know that you've been writing a lot about some of these locations like Egypt, Peter, haven't you? And we initially sort of focused the discussion on comparing the US with EMEA, because of course the US market, where Alorica comes from and where they've really kind of focused for a long time, it's mostly a single language. I know that now people are focusing a bit more on Spanish, but it has for a long time been mostly focused on English. You can cross states without too much problem. There's not that much regulation. Whereas in Europe, you've got different regulations in every jurisdiction. You have a lot of cross-border business. And of course, it's multilingual. You've got so many different countries and different languages to deal with. So there's some big differences in the approach to CX between these two areas.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. And I think that, just by the way, I got to catch up with Matt for a while last week when I was in London. It was great to see him. He's doing some great things with Alorica. This is a company I've been following for well over a decade, as long as I can remember being an analyst in the BPO and the CX space. I've had the chance to visit their headquarters in Irvine, California a number of times and to see different sites around the world. Mark, what I would say is that I think that the steps that they're taking to expand beyond the traditional fronts that they've been playing in within the EMEA space, which most notably has been in Bulgaria, they're moving nicely into places like Poland, into places like Egypt as well. And I think what this does is it provides the company with that level, not just of diversification in terms of different skill sets, whether it's language or functional skills, but it also truly demonstrates that this is a global company. It's not just one that's got a great footprint in the Americas. It's not just one that's got a really solid footprint in the scope of APAC, but now we can see this EMEA presence expanding. And that's so important for a firm that is, interestingly enough, the largest minority-owned business in the United States right now.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talked about was how do you prepare for a potential recession? Certainly there's been economists warning of this across Europe, in the US as well. We don't know if it's going to happen, but there's still a lot of economic uncertainty around. And a nearshoring strategy definitely sort of plays into this by focusing on building resilience, moving your resources around, but keeping them fairly close to where you're operating.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that whole idea around diversification is just so important as we take a look at what's happening in regards to a potential slowdown and the need to try and source the right talent in the right places. Alorica's strategy, it makes a lot of sense. And it's one that if you take a look back historically, the company's been very adept at finding different up and coming locations as well as established ones where they've been able to effectively anchor themselves. And I see with what Matt's doing in EMEA, this is very much part of the strategy. And it's one that I think will have a great deal of success for them moving forward.
Okay, great. So let's go straight to the interview with Matt Sims of Alorica EMEA. Hi, Matt. It's great to get you back on the podcast again. And if I remember well, when you came on the previous time, which was probably a couple of years ago now, it was the number one listened to episode for more than a year, I think. So hopefully we can match that again.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, good to catch up again. I think it's actually been more than a couple of years since we did that last recording. But as you suggest, let's hope there's some popularity behind this one too.
Okay, all right, let's see then. Well, now you're the EMEA president at Alorica. And Alorica, I mean, since the foundation of the company, I mean, it's always been very US focused, which is, several decades. But it seems that from very recently, I mean, appointing you into this role, the company's really prioritizing EMEA. So what is it about Europe specifically that makes it such an attractive market? And why focus on Europe now?
Well, Mark, I think the EMEA region is significant in scale, and depending on which report you read, circa 30% of all CXM outsourcing is done within the market place here, and the compound growth year over year is north of 15%. So I guess if you treat the numbers in isolation, there's evidence enough there to suggest that the focus should be on this as a growing opportunity for Alorica. But I think more specifically, when it comes down to Alorica, taking aside the very deliberate focus in the past about having a US-centric strategy, the customer base that we have on a global basis sees us with around a third of our existing customers having activity located in EMEA. So it's an absolute priority for us to be able to become a much more enterprise-related service provider in the region. That demand for multilingual support is growing. We're seeing customers looking for more end-to-end, enterprise-based, all-encompassing service supply. So it's become very, very front and center for us as an organization.
Okay, and I'm guessing that one of the key differences between the US market and Europe is the need to have multilingual capabilities. I mean, are there specific sort of cultural nuances or contrasts in different regulations, practices? I mean, is it a completely different ball game trying to handle a multilingual environment?
Yeah, the simple answer to that question, Mark, is yes, absolutely. I mean, if you look around the Europe, Middle East, and Africa, there's a multitude of different languages, first and foremost, that you have to be able to accommodate for. But then within each of the jurisdictions and countries within the region, there are different rules, regulations, processes, procedures that you have to adhere to. So, there is inherent complexity to doing business in this marketplace. So the amount of consideration, foresight, and planning that's gone into our decision to make that strategic rollout into the region has been very well considered, and something that we've thought about incredibly carefully.
Okay, and I mean, looking on from the period of the pandemic, I mean, that's created a massive change in the way that companies interact with their customers. But has anything positive come out of that? And have you seen it change or be different between the US and Europe?
Well, I think going back to the point that I just referenced, Mark, I think as the CXM market matures, organizers, i.e. end users of outsourcing services, are looking for enterprise solutions from their business partners. So I think we have to, as an industry, start thinking about the globalized nature of the way that we solution on behalf of our customers. And in order to be better as an industry at what we do, it's about recognizing a couple of things. First and foremost, the pandemic taught us that people centricity as an employer has become ever more important. We created an industry-wide global work at home operating model overnight, something that the industry had been trying to do for at least 10 years prior to the pandemic. And there was huge resistance on the buy side to making that happen. As an industry, we managed to successfully facilitate that very quickly, almost overnight in many, many cases. But post-pandemic, what we've seen now is that the people culture or the employment culture has shifted ever so slightly. And that shift means that people now are used to a better work-life balance, the opportunity not to travel into an office every single day and lose those hours of their life stuck in traffic. And of course, traffic is very different depending on where you are in the world. It wouldn't be uncommon to think that people in the Philippines or Egypt, for example, could spend 2 hours a day traveling in and out of a work environment. So creating that kind of hybrid working model environment, I think, has become a very interesting proposition for outsourcers. And it's enabled us, I think, to attract people into our organizations as an industry that perhaps didn't see contact center environments as a preferred place to work in the past. That has enabled us to kind of address that war on talent that we've seen across the industry. And more specifically, that war on talent has become much more prolific in the EMEA marketplace as organizations look to source the right skills and the right languages specifically in order to manage their contact. So kind of, I would say a positive outcome of the pandemic scenario has been that as an industry, as an employer, the ability to provide that more flexible working environment has given us access to a better pool of talent, skills, languages, and resources. I think BCP as well, Mark, has become has seen some advantage post-pandemic as well. As I said, we all reacted in the industry very, very quickly, very successfully in almost all cases to the pandemic environment. But I think what it has done is given us an opportunity to think specifically around how solutions are set up, how they're managed, how they're structured. I talk a lot about globalization of solution offering and globalization of language capability. And that kind of couples together with that enterprise model of how we service, how we deliver solutions on behalf of our customers. I think, we know now as an industry and the end user community know now the absolute importance of BCP. And BCP was something that we all talked about a lot. It's about how important we considered it pre-pandemic versus how important we now know it absolutely has to be as we go forward as well.
Yeah, and do you see that as a real driver for outsourcing, I suppose? I mean, I suppose it's like working with a partner that can offer some sort of nearshore options can actually create a more resilient business environment in future.
I think that's right, Mark. And when I talk about globalized capability and globalized language, what I really mean by that is how do we best accommodate our service offering with geodiversity coupled with labor availability and skills availability in different parts of the world? It wouldn't be a surprise to anybody for me to suggest that German skills, language skills, are one of the biggest challenges that the European market faces right now from a CXM standpoint. Now, if as a service offering and a solution capability, we have the ability to provide German language across a multitude of different locations, we not only provide the skills and sustainability that we need for those skills, but we provide that BCP capability as well. Because it's okay, I think, to talk about pandemic and the recent challenges that presented to us, but we also know that there are other challenges that get created in different parts of the world that can disrupt CXM service delivery.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose one thing that it comes back to resilience as well, that I wanted to ask you about is the potential for a recession in the near future. Of course, it depends on which newspaper you're reading or which economist you listen to. There's many that say we're probably going to bounce back and it won't happen, but there's also some doom mongers as well. I mean, clearly the economy is quite uncertain in both the US and Europe at present. So how does that affect CX strategy? I mean, what can people do in this kind of uncertain environment with their customer service strategy?
So it's not going to be a surprise to suggest that resilient companies are going to recover faster if they've considered how they set up their CXM service offering. And if I look back at what's considered or titled the Great Recession, at least, the outcome of that, suggested through some of the statistics, again, back to your point, depending on what you read, but 2009 data suggests that organizations that had better resilience, inherent BCP, and had considered the impact of kind of extraneous events that they were not necessarily in complete control of, those organizations came out with stronger EBITDA percentages, for example, and the average that's suggested is around a 10% improvement on EBITDA for those resilient organizations. Whereas organizations that hadn't been so forward thinking and built that level of resilience in lost somewhere in the region of around 15% of their overall profitability. But I think, going back to the question, that there are a number of things that organizations can do in order to make sure that they manage and set themselves up for success, or at least to mitigate some of the headwinds that are created in those environments. And back to the point about evaluating global delivery mix. How do you structure your operations in order to make sure that you have that sustainability in your operating model? How do you have that agility and that flexibility to create sustainable operating environments? Is absolutely fundamental. I think adapting to customer behaviors as well is also really important. We spend a lot of time as an industry talking about customers, obviously, that's who we're servicing, but it's about making sure that as an organization that you're flexing yourself and flexing your service offering and your contact channel strategy, for example, to adapt to what customers expect and need from you. And different world environments and different world events, as we saw in the pandemic, suggested that customers want to communicate more. They want to use different channels in certain scenarios in order to accommodate some of the contact that they want to have with you. So that customer journey piece, Mark, I think is really important, and making sure the continued evaluation of that is front and center.
Okay. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So I think one of the other important points as well is around automation and transactional volume. As an industry, we've talked a lot about removing waste from the system, and by waste I mean driving inefficiencies out of the customer journey. So making sure that as a professional service provider of CXM solutions, the opportunity exists to do that evaluation of customer journey, set up and structure the journey in a way that accommodates what customers want and expect and need from you, and to take some of that inefficiency out of the flow by automation, whether that automation be through contact channels, whether that be through proactive engagement, etc. I think the last point I'll make on that, Mark, as well, is also make sure that you're set up for strategic partnerships. Being a one-stop shop and a complete end-to-end service provider, or outsourcing to an end-to-end service provider, has resilience challenges in itself. And I think from a risk mitigation perspective, from staying ahead on the digital bleeding edge transformation curve, I think it's important. But it's also important as well to make sure customer retention and lifetime value of those customers is addressed as well through making sure you're working with the right organizations as part of your service mix.
Okay, yeah. And talking about the bleeding edge, that sort of leads on to something I want to ask about startups, because traditionally we've seen Silicon Valley as the sort of hotbed of new tech companies. But more recently, we're seeing a real wave coming out of Europe. Companies like Wise, Revolut, Monzo, they're going global and even exporting their services to the US. But do companies like this, when they're hitting a sort of period of hypergrowth, do they have particular sort of CX challenges?
I think they do, Mark, and I'll make a generalist statement here, but I think when organizations start that hypergrowth curve, I think they typically, well, first and foremost, those companies typically come from a tech background. So they start off being a tech service capability that then needs to have an element of CX capability to underpin and support the customers once the customers are built, or at least onboarded. And my generalist statement really is around CX can sometimes be seen as a secondary need. And it's where organizations are slow to adopt and adapt a kind of a robust CXM strategy is where they fall foul, because they end up implementing it too late, or they implement it too quickly too late, and they end up with something which is suboptimal. When in reality, if you look around at the telco or the utilities market as a great comparison, the majority of the giants in those two verticals had the opportunity to start again. I'm sure they'd do things very, very differently based on what they know now. So those hypercare organizations in the fintech space have a unique opportunity to start building from the ground up in the right way, taking the lessons learned over the last 20, 30 years of CX and how to solution for that. I think there's an element of keeping pace with CX demand as well. And by CX demand, I really mean what customers are demanding from those organizations. And without a concerted effort, without a properly structured arm of that fintech organization that's focused on customer and customer care, keeping pace with what your customers want and need from you, the different channels, the different types of comms that they want to have with you, etc., it can sometimes leave them behind.
Yeah, and I suppose one of the most important things there is to be able to get the people to come and work on your team. So, I mean, how does Alorica attract the right talent compared to if I was looking for a job in a contact center, why wouldn't I just go and work directly for a bank instead?
Mark, I think that's kind of the fundamental question around people centricity and ease of employment. And Alorica is an incredibly people-centric organization. The way that we structure ourselves globally and regionally in order to accommodate different types of roles, and how we train, adapt, and the approach that we take to learning and development gives us a unique opportunity to work with people to help ready them, not just for the jobs that they do today, but for the jobs that are going to be available for them in the future as well. I think overall as an industry, the outsourcing space has been a big proponent of recruiting from within, and having the right types of L&D environment that give people that ability, not just, as I said, to learn the day-to-day skills needed to do the job in hand, but to give them the opportunity to grow and develop into bigger roles, different roles, and provide that internal level of promotion, I think is incredibly important if you're going to be successful in providing that sustainable environment as an employer.
Okay, and one of the important things I think that we've seen recently with the launch of tools like ChatGPT is that the technology is just getting better faster than ever. There seems to be an acceleration in how good the artificial intelligence systems are becoming. So when you're designing a customer journey with a client, how do you decide, where you need the kind of human service and where does the technology fit in, and how do you sort of balance that?
I think the answer to that question, Mark, is that it's not a one size fits all. And apologies if that's an unhelpful statement, but I think the opportunity to collaborate and partner with the organization that you're trying to support in how they create those effective customer journeys is incredibly important. And that's a fairly obvious statement, but I think the ability to use data to understand how customers behave, to correlate that back to today's customer journey environment and how that customer journey environment needs to be adjusted, I think is kind of fundamental to answering that question. I think a couple of years ago when we were talking, you heard me talk about contact avoidance versus avoidable contact. And I still think that's a big challenge in CX as an industry-wide opportunity, really. And just to reiterate or reinforce what I said before, the difference between the two is contact avoidance is about using channels and deflecting customers to something which you consider to be appropriate for their service offering, versus avoidable contact, which is how to use data and understand customer behavior to design a journey for them that accommodates their need. And of course, the need of the customer can be dependent on a load of different things. Why they want to contact you is an obvious one, but who the demographic is of who's contacting you is also a really important one as well. And we've talked a lot as an industry about why different demographics want to use different channels and how digital has become more interesting to younger generations, but more traditionally, older generations still continue to use the telephone. I'm not sure I necessarily always agree with those kinds of statements. And again, it's data driven, and what you read will determine your own thought process on that. But I think that one of the other things that's really, really important here, Mark, is actually recognizing the kind of humility and the emotion that exists in certain different customer contact and contact types, and being able to address national identity when it comes to EMEA, for example, and being able to support in the language that you're supporting with a human contact gives you the ability to bring culture into the conversation and to make sure that culture of contact and customer experience is at the forefront of what you do. And I know that there are a lot of studies out there that would support that as a principle.
Yeah, well, and I mean, just to wrap up really then, and on the subject of studies, I wanted to ask you maybe if you had a couple of predictions, because we're still in Q1. I mean, what are you sort of looking at focusing on for the rest of the year, or do you see any particular developments that are particularly interesting?
Yeah, and this is we all do this, don't we, Mark, at the beginning of every year, whether it's in our own heads or whether we do it publicly. It's and I think quite often we can be guilty of kind of regurgitating year over year some of the things that exist and have existed for a long period of time. But if I could try and sum some of those up, we're focusing, or I'm focusing here, on the ability to adapt, to be more flexible, to have more agility, to be more scalable for our customers and our future customers. And that's about us creating geodiversity and focusing on markets and geographies that give us the ability to be that enterprise partner for our customers. Some great reports and data that's just come out of Everest that talk about Africa, for example, and Africa becoming a more significant part of the contact center ecosystem. And I'm not talking about North and South, I'm talking about the sub-Saharan region. So I think as we continue our due diligence and as we continue to look at our rollout across the EMEA footprint, we will continue to be flexible in our thinking in support of what, not necessarily what the market's saying, but in terms of what the data is telling us and how our customers are informing us about their strategies as we go forward. So that power to adapt, I think, is an incredibly important one. I think it would be crass of me to not talk about people and our people and the people that we hire. And we talk internally about hyper-personalization, about how we not only hire people, but how we develop that talent as well. We talked about that a couple of questions ago. But I think building deeper, richer emotional intelligence as an employer, I think, is going to be invaluable, and any organization that gets that right is going to be armed with the power of loyal and sustainable workforce. And it helps us as an industry, of course, because we internally promote and we create the leaders of the future. And certainly we've set ourselves up as an organization, both regionally and globally, in order to be able to provide that stepping stone opportunity for our people. Again, talking about digital and human, Mark, that's only going to become a deeper and more necessary part of customer journey definition and build out, and also as a strategic pillar of any contact center organization. Going back to the point about making sure that we're partnering with the right organizations, making sure we're hiring the right people, making sure that we're working with our customers to build bespoke solutions on their behalf so that they recognize their customers' behavior rather than Alorica trying to be a one-size-fits-all organization that takes kind of generic solutions to the market. We've spent a lot of time in recent months looking at how we build out our DX service capability, and completely recognize the fact that their CX and DX are two different things, although intrinsically linked, and making sure that we have that DX transformational capability is led by individuals that understand the difference between the two, but also how the linkage between the two things works as well. So I think that kind of partnering piece and making sure that we combine that digital and human delivery together is going to be a key focus for the industry. And the other thing as well, Mark, just back to the other point around recessionary pressures and different economic outlooks, depending on where you are in the world. I think I can foresee an element of continued risk transfer from end user buyers of outsourced services to the outsourcers. I think in my 25 plus years working in the industry, I don't think I've seen difficult economic situations occur where the outsourcing industry hasn't benefited from that, from a transfer of service to those organizations. Hopefully we can, as an industry, deal with that risk transfer, not just on an opportunistic basis, but also in terms of making sure that we as an industry take a step forward and we provide that transformative and sophisticated service CX solutioning that can be more prevailing and become much more of the blueprint for the future.
And I mean, just a final point then, do you think that sort of risk transfer, is that just because the way that people want to work has changed? And, you were saying before about how people want much more flexibility. And do you think that, I don't know, that some companies are finding it harder to adjust than others, and so it just helps to get a partner to take on all of that challenge?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things, Mark, but it always is, right? And I think the opportunity for the end user buyer community to spend time, focus attention on what it does as a core service offering, whether that be product or service, I think during a recessionary time or through tough economic times becomes much more of a boardroom conversation. And as those organizations look inwardly about how they adjust themselves to those economic conditions, they, from experience, I would suggest that they then look at other professional organizations, i.e. the outsourced community, to help them deal with CX. And hopefully, as I said, that CX service outsourcer brings something new to the table and just doesn't do that kind of mess for less scenario, which continues or has the opportunity to devalue what outsourcing actually should be all about. So I think, to kind of try and sum up that, I think there will always be a requirement during those kind of difficult economic times for organizations to become much more inward focused on what their core solutioning is, and then rely on the strategic partner, i.e. an outsourcer, to support them to navigate through those difficult economic times.
All right, Matt, that's great. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. We really appreciate your feedback and suggestions. You can reach myself, Mark Hillary, or Peter Ryan via LinkedIn. Please also leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast provider, as that helps more people to find us. As always, we'd like to thank Chris Haig at Traction Media for the CX Files graphics. See you next week.